Well, I want to welcome everyone to today's Marketing Council meeting. It is a virtual lunch and learn. So as we have done in the past, I encourage you to please eat your lunch while you join us today for some virtual networking and of course some education from our phenomenal speakers, Marnie and Emily. They have presented to our council earlier in the year, and due to your feedback that you wanted them to come back and share more insight, they are joining us yet again. So a couple of reminders: if you can keep yourselves on mute. But with that said, please ask questions. We will certainly open it up for dialogue after the presentation. But if you've got questions, either feel free to raise them in the chat or raise your hand and we can pause. This is a session that's designed to help you learn and have takeaways. So the more you can get out of it, the better. And I think having a dialogue really kind of facilitates that. So I'd encourage you to ask questions. I want to again thank you all for being a part of Marketing Council this year. If you were able to join us in Westbrook last month, you probably heard that Mike Rasmus is going to be taking over Marketing Council. He's already kind of started to do that. So I'm not going away. I will still be joining Marketing Council meetings, but Mike's going to be your new contact day to day. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm going to introduce our two fabulous speakers. I did not memorize their bios, so I'm going to read them briefly. Marnie Grumbach specializes in professional services and B2B marketing, communications, and public relations. She founded Fluent in 2012 to help clients create and implement effective integrative marketing and communication strategies. A problem solver by nature, Marnie loves both art and science of integrated marketing. She's also an experienced copywriter. Emily Bradbent has worked with Maine-based clients ranging from hospitality to healthcare. She views working in public relations as a unique opportunity to help clients share their stories within the world. She's passionate about independent businesses and sits on the board of Portland's Buy Local. So with that said, I am going to turn that over to Marnie and Emily, and welcome to Marketing Council.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jen. Thank you for the warm introduction and welcome. And thank you all for inviting us back. It's great to see some familiar faces and names and the participant list. It's great to be with you guys again. And I think this is your last session of 2022, if we can believe that the year is wrapping up. So I just want to make sure I can advance my slides here. So just a little quick introduction. If you haven't attended a session with us in the past or worked with us or know us, we're Fluent IMC. We are an integrated marketing communications agency. Our office is in Westbrook, but we work virtually as well and work with clients near and far. We do a lot of strategy and planning work, provide fractional marketing support, do a lot of public relations, which we're going to be digging into today. Also traditional media buying and digital advertising, which I think our last session was on digital advertising. So that's just a little bit about us. And we also welcome you to follow us on our business page on LinkedIn. We're trying to share more content there, and on Instagram. Would love to keep in touch with you. So Emily and I are going to be tackling a pretty big topic for you today, PR 101, and really what is PR and why are we even having this conversation? We really love giving this presentation because PR, we believe that it's sort of misunderstood. It's kind of I like to refer to it as kind of a cousin to marketing. It's definitely not paid advertising. It really is a specialty of its own, and I think requires, some time and attention and some education around it. So that's what we're going to be trying to provide today. So first things first, what is the definition of PR? We like to use these two different definitions. The one on the left, public relations, is a strategic communication process that builds mutually beneficial relationships between organizations and their publics. And the second one, the professional maintenance of a favorable public image by a company or other organization or famous person. This is the one that we sort of align with the most. And it's mostly because I think if you're attending this session today, likely you are in some capacity the keeper of your organization, your credit union's brand. And as someone who has that responsibility, maintaining your organization's reputation, that's our job, that's our role and responsibility. And we have to find different ways to do that. So that's the definition that we tend to use when we think about what is PR. So one of the things that complicates and makes this a little bit of a muddy gray area is there's so many terms out there. There's so much jargon within the marketing and PR and advertising space. I think our last session on digital advertising, we had a whole glossary of terms for you. It's really not that different in the PR space. So I like to just go through some of the terms that maybe you hear when people talk about PR. And this is, sort of how we think about it. So one of the terms that we'll talk about today and comes up a lot is strategic communications. And I like to think of that as like the big umbrella term. It's like everything that your organization would do, both internally and externally, to communicate with your audiences. So that's like the big overarching term. And then public relations is really a level below that, where you're really looking at communicating with your audience externally. And again, back to that definition, thinking about maintaining your reputation, maintaining what you're known for, and those key messages that you want to have in front of your audience. Another term that we hear a lot, we use a lot, is media relations. And that's really a practice or a methodology of having your organization and yourself personally having a relationship with the media. And we'll talk as we get into the discussion today about what is the media. Is it just a journalist? We like to think of media broadly, so we'll talk about that more. Then earned media. Earned media is really the result of your work. So if you're pitching an idea to a journalist, or you're collaborating with an entity or an affiliate organization, and you do manage to get your message conveyed through them, that's the coverage, that's that placement. So earned media is really getting your message across through that third party. So those are just some terms that are thrown around a lot. I like to clear those up, at least from our perspective. This is how we navigate it. And those terms will come up as we talk today. And then Emily will jump into, just for a second, types of PR.
So like Marnie said, PR really is its own specialty, but then within the field of PR, we have several subspecialties, I guess, or, if you've worked with an agency or a PR professional in the past, you can spend a lot of time working in any one or a few of these different areas and really become an expert in these fields. So some of them are crisis communications, public affairs or lobbying, corporate and social responsibility, or internal communications. At Fluent, we specialize really in media relations and executive visibility and thought leadership, because we work with a lot of clients that don't necessarily have tangible products that they're selling, but we're selling their services and really helping them to position their experts as thought leaders in their fields. So we focus a lot there.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. So if you've attended one of our sessions before, you'll probably have seen this graphic before, but this is one of the things that we like to talk about before we dig into earned media and PR specifically is looking at integrated marketing communications and where does public relations and earned media fit into the big picture of all of your branding and marketing communications program. So I have to give credit to another PR practitioner, Ginny Dietrich. She actually trademarked what she calls the PISO model, which stands for paid, earned, shared, and owned. And our graphic here, this is one that we use with all new clients when we're explaining this big picture concept of integrated marketing. Ours is arranged a little bit differently, but basically what we're trying to convey here is that we've got four main categories of content. You've got paid media, owned media, earned media, and shared media. So paid media, just like it sounds, is media and content that you put paid advertising spend behind, like a TV spot, a newspaper ad, sponsored or boosted social media content, programmatic, ad placements, digital display ads, radio spots, Google AdWords, pretty much any content or message that you're paying and having ad spend behind it goes in the paid media category. Then owned media is anything that you and your organization creates and controls. So your website, this is usually the largest piece of owned media, if you will, because so many organizations invest so much to have a robust website, especially in a space like financial services where you're interacting with your members, or for other types of, banks, referring to them as, customers with their personal products. You really, the website needs to be an interactive tool. So that piece of owned media is really important, but it also houses all of your brand materials. So it might have a blog, you might post webinars, podcasts. Outside of your website is email marketing. So keeping in touch with your members, keeping in touch with other stakeholders, any educational content. So there's a whole huge realm of owned media. We could have a separate session about that sometime, but that's what we're talking about with owned media. Then there's earned media, and that's really where PR fits into this big picture. And earned media is distribution of your message through a credible third party. And this includes press coverage, it could be a speaking engagement, could be a podcast interview where you're a guest on, another podcast or radio program, really where you are earning that opportunity for that third party outlet to share your message and give your brand visibility. And then finally, shared media, which obviously we all know this is a huge, huge piece of our marketing and communications programs today, is our social media channels and the content that we're producing and sharing on those channels. So big picture, this is when we talk about integrating types of content and sharing messages across integrated channels, we organize our thinking and our strategies in these 4 categories. And then Emily will talk a little bit about our approach to thinking about getting started with PR and using some owned media as a kickstart.
Yeah, so hopefully even if a lot of those were maybe overwhelming or you realize you're not doing all of them, even if you're just starting with PR, it's very likely that you've produce some sort of owned content, owned media at this point. So that can be like blog posts, videos, any type of content like that. And one of the ways that we work to leverage this integrated approach is that we start sometimes with owned media and then figure out how we can use that to generate content for earned media. So we're always thinking proactively about PR, which means we're not sitting around and just waiting for news. Yes, sometimes something timely comes up and that becomes part of a PR plan, but we also want to make sure that we're actively communicating our messaging to the media throughout the course of whatever engagement we have with a client. So one of the ways we do this is actually creating owned media content. That typically starts with us sitting down with a spokesperson or whoever the company chooses to be a representative for them and identify one of their areas of expertise. A common question that we ask is, what questions are you being asked? So we really want to get a sense of what are the topics that are of interest to their audience, and use that to generate some sort of topic that we can produce typically into a long form article. That helps us kind of flesh out the concept, and it also allows us to identify some elements that we can use for earned media. So once we've refined that topic, we often will pitch it to maybe a publication that will publish the article as is, or think about, can we use this as an opportunity for a speaking engagement? Think about different ways that we can repurpose that. So you might have some of that exists already, and you can think about how you might use it as earned media.
Absolutely. Thank you. And getting a little bit deeper into the earned media strategy piece, I think sometimes clients, especially with organizations that maybe haven't spent a lot of time on PR, maybe they're more focused on advertising, the paid media or owned media side, they might be wondering, why invest in this? What is really where's the value in this? Should we really bother? And I think it's important to really think about what is it we're trying to accomplish with PR. And this is where earning third-party credibility is really, this is huge. This is really what it's all about. And what I'm talking about is we as people, it's pretty common in human psychology, we trust information that we receive from a credible third party more than we trust advertising content. It's all about, social proof. It's why we go and look at reviews before we make a buying decision. It's why we vet someone that we're thinking about hiring. It's why we look for references. It's just how we make good, solid decisions. So when we're thinking about trying to get messages out, working with a credible third party and getting them to share that message on your behalf really, really elevates the power of that message. So we'll talk about third party credibility, but that's really the why. We have this conversation with senior leadership teams a lot, and that's huge. So, okay, let's talk about really getting a PR strategy built. So many of you probably are already doing this. Maybe some of you are thinking, hey, this is really something I should put on paper at least for 2023, if you have never done it formally. So we're just going to kind of walk you through the way that we develop PR strategies for our clients. And I will say that these are very scalable. So sometimes we do really, really in-depth communications and PR strategies that are for the whole year, for an ongoing communications program. Sometimes we do them for a one-off campaign. So don't feel like you have to think about this in terms of an entire year or 2-year thing. You could think about this for one project or one campaign. So the first step is really think strategically about who you want to reach. And this is pretty obvious. Like as marketers, we're always thinking about our target audience, but with PR specifically, most of the time organizations that we work with really do need to prioritize. They don't have the means to communicate or engage with anybody and everybody. Usually there's some level of prioritization that has to happen. So when you're looking at just your PR program, and who are the audiences that you really want to reach, putting that on paper. So that's the very first step. And then thinking about, and Emily spoke to this a minute ago, what are their interests? What are those individuals? What do they care about? And then if you could get them to remember one thing about your credit union, what is it? And we ask clients to really think about that because you're going to want to have 1 or 2 key messages that you build your entire PR strategy around, that you keep beating the drum with that message, and you are trying to get that message and that story told in a variety of different ways. So that's an important step, to take that time internally to really understand what do we want people to know. Then the next part of a PR strategy is some type of measurable objective. And I added in here realistic objective, and we'll talk about that a little bit more because with PR and earned media specifically, it's challenging. It's even more challenging now than it was a year ago or 5 years ago. So really setting expectations with your team and, understanding, what are we really realistically going to be able to accomplish. Sometimes a measurable objective with a PR campaign is we'd like to have, all TV stations in our market come to our press conference and cover our news. Or we'd like to have one trade association write a feature story. Or sometimes we would just like to see a lift in traffic to our website after that piece of earned media has published by that outlet. So, thinking through what are 2 or 3 measurable objectives. And then I feel really strongly about step 4, making a long-term plan for how are you going to integrate your PR efforts with your marketing, because we want, back to that IMC graphic, we want all of these different efforts to work together, to be integrated together, to support one another. They shouldn't be operating in their own lanes. They should be supporting one another so that the messages are getting out. Multiple different touch points to reach your audiences. So thinking long-term for how are we, and we have a case study we'll show you where we did take some time to think through how are we going to integrate this with paid advertising and with owned media. So we'll talk about that more in a minute. So Emily's going to go through a little bit about how we think about media, and then we'll get into figuring out what is worthy of sharing with the media.
So this one is really important when you're thinking about that strategy in terms of what would success look like for you. And generally, media is a means of mass communication. So traditionally, we might think of that as the newspaper, radio, TV. It's really changed a lot over recent years. Like Marnie said, we're seeing such a difference, even in the past year or two. But you've probably noticed this as well. You know, we're now thinking about podcasters and bloggers as members of the media, but also influencers, people who are posting on social media. Think about your day-to-day and where you get your information. Yes, you might be reading, you know, the Press Herald's website, but you might also be turning to those people that you see on social media and you trust them. So we're thinking more broadly than ever before about what falls into this media category. And another one that's really important for a lot of the work that we do, and probably for you all as well, is thinking about trade associations or affiliate organizations. So it might have a little bit more gravitas to have an article published somewhere, but perhaps a trade association that you have a relationship with is really going to put you in front of more of your key audience members. So these organizations typically will have their own blogs or newsletters, other member communications, or speaking opportunities. So don't forget to think about those when you're thinking about what your goals for media coverage would look like.
There we go.
And then, like Marnie said, identifying some of those key messages that you really will work into each of these placements, ideally, is important. So we have a healthcare client that really wants to convey that hospice isn't just for the last few days of life. So in that instance, it's maybe a misconception that you need to continue to educate your audience on something that is not commonly known. Or perhaps you want to convey the amount of lending capacity you have. You can do more like larger, more complex deals. Or we have another client who's expanding fiber throughout a number of states. So thinking generally, what's that overarching theme that you want to keep conveying regardless of what media outlets you're targeting?
Awesome, thank you. So the next part of the strategy, you've got your first 4 steps that we went through. You've thought about your media wish list, thought about your key message. Now it's time to figure out how are we going to get the word out? So a few tips that we like to share is one, and we hinted at this before, successful public relations efforts, they're really successful when you're proactive. Reactive PR, meaning waiting for a journalist to call you, waiting for a newspaper or a TV station or that affiliate organization to take interest in you, very unlikely to have success. It does happen for for larger organizations that might have breaking news, but for most of the clients that we work with who really invest in PR and have some level of program running, it's very much a proactive effort, thinking about earning media coverage, getting that key message out through earned media coverage over a longer period of time. Then figuring out who is on your wish list. And Emily talked about this a little bit and referenced, the example of a trade association, and maybe their membership newsletter is a great communications tool for getting your story in front of the right audience. So when we start working with clients, whether it's a campaign or an annual engagement, we really want to understand where would you love to have your brand have visibility? Where would you love to have new media editorial relationships? We've worked with clients where, years ago we worked with a construction client and they had a key message about a huge investment they had made in restructuring their whole safety program, which was really important to their employees and to their community. And they said, oh, if we could just have a feature in Incident Prevention Magazine, that would be amazing. And at the time, I had not heard of Incident Prevention Magazine, but in their space, it was like, like being on the cover of the Rolling Stones, and we managed to get it done. But it was, that wish list is so individual for every organization, depending upon your strategy, your audience, and the key message that you want to get in front of them. And then the other thing we like to say is not any media is the right media. So you could work really hard to get a front page story in the Wall Street Journal, but sometimes, sometimes a story or a column submission in a trade publication. We had a client a few years ago, and they were a law firm, and their target audience was human resources directors, and the SHRM newsletter was where it was at for them, and that was our focus. And so, like Emily said, sometimes there's gravitas or prestige with that national mainstream publication, but when you get realistic about your objectives, it really helps you focus your PR efforts for the best results. And then you need to figure out, what are you going to share? What types of news do you want to share, or can you share? We all have, activities within our organizations that we believe are worth sharing, and figuring out, is a media outlet going to be interested in this? And also kind of thinking of a mental checklist, or going back to your strategy, does making an announcement through a press release or spreading the word through working hard on pitching, is this really going to reinforce that key message? Is this in line with our strategy? So those are some things to think about. We did create, I'll get to it in a second, and Emily will talk about thinking about a story arc, but in a minute, we'll talk through some different scenarios that we go through with clients about things that might be worth sharing and might be better on the paid advertising side. But Emily's going to talk about story arc for a second.
Yeah, this is a whole topic that we find really interesting, and we have a blog post on our website that we have a link to in the presentation. If you're interested, we go a little bit more in depth. But this is a great way to think about, like, once you've identified what you want to share, how are you going to communicate that and frame your messaging? One of the reasons that we start with a really thorough strategy is to develop an outline like this, so that we can see kind of what our long-term engagement looks like, and be sure that we're balancing our PR efforts. Especially in the Maine market, we might be working with limited media outlets that we're targeting. So you don't necessarily want to be reaching out again and again and again to the same person, because they're going to say, okay, great news, but we just covered you. So you've got to kind of balance this out a little bit. So just very generally, the story arc concept is thinking about identifying how short-term successes can help tell your bigger picture messaging. So kind of the key messaging. It also allows you to say, maybe, 6 months from now, you have a really big announcement that you want to make. How can you be thinking and working backward from that date, and kind of getting your name out there in advance, positioning key employees as thought leaders prior to that, and building up to that bigger announcement.
So this is a conversation that we have with clients a lot, especially when they ask us or say, hey, we have this thing, let's put out a press release. So we just came up with a few scenarios that come up often. These are just a few, there are hundreds more, but CEO, you have a CEO retiring, or a succession plan announcement. You're changing a business name. Maybe you've gone through a merger or an acquisition, and the business name is going to change. Maybe you've won an award. Maybe you're launching a new product or service line. Maybe you received a small grant, or maybe your organization donated a grant. You might be expanding into a new market. Maybe you've partnered with another organization on a large deal, or maybe you're hosting a conference. So these are just some common scenarios that come across our desks, often working with clients as their PR partner. And we've highlighted a few that we feel fall in sort of an "it depends" category. And I say that because, and we've talked about this a little bit, especially in Maine, there are so few journalists anymore, which is sad to say, but it really is just the reality. Like when we think about a lot of these topics here, they're, business related topics. The audience may be a consumer audience or another business audience, but really we're pitching usually some sort of business or local reporter. We have maybe 3 media outlets in the state of Maine that are truly business media outlets. And then we have local community papers, and there are fewer of those, and each of those have fewer journalists. And so what I'm not trying to be too negative, I'm just trying to be realistic that when we go through situations where we're talking about, well, would this be a good story? We've had clients say to us even recently, oh, I just know that my community paper is going to love this fluff story. And the reality is, like, they don't have time for fluff stories because they don't have anyone to go and cover a fluff thing. So some of the it depends things, it can be very difficult to go back to your internal team, especially if this is a big deal for your organization, and say, hey, I actually don't think that this is going to be super successful on the media relations side. So that's why, like, winning an award, was it a national award or was it a smaller local thing? Did most of your competitors win the same award? And are all of those papers and media outlets going to be getting press releases from all of those other institutions as well? So it's not that you won't get any coverage, but you might just get a small little mention. And that can be really disheartening for your, as you as the marketer or the PR person, to have to go back to your supervisor or your team and be like, so we got a small little mention when it was this big deal internally. That's not fun, but that's the reality sometimes. Launching a new product, this is a tough one. Some journalists really do not want to touch anything that is remotely self-promotional. If it is, maybe you've been working for years to develop a new product or service line, and it's a huge advancement for your organization. I think that it is possible to put out a press release, but just understanding that you have to really pull away those self-promotional pieces of the message and save those for paid advertising. The small grant, I've seen that change a lot over the last 10 years. I think 10 years ago, we had a banking client, they would donate $25,000 a year, one $25,000 grant plus a lot of other giving throughout the year. We used to get media coverage for $25,000. Now it's minimum $250,000 for a bigger story. So it's tough. And hosting a conference, it depends. If you have a really notable keynote speaker, maybe, but more likely you're going to get a calendar listing. So again, I don't want to be too negative, but this is sort of the exercise that we have to go through a lot of times when planning out these campaigns. And the good news is that when you're really thinking about this big picture, saving some paid advertising dollars, you can put paid advertising behind any exciting announcement that you want to make. It's just understanding, is this appropriate for public relations and earned media, or should I just put ad spend behind this? Often the answer is both, but that's just a conversation that we have a lot with clients, and thought it might be helpful to go through a few of those scenarios today. Do we have
Marnie,
a question in the chat?
I love this slide because it really, as somebody who's been pitching media for years, it's really true. And it goes to show why earned media and marketing do need to work hand in hand with one another, because if it's not an earned media play, it could be a paid media play, something you want to work into your marketing plans.
Absolutely.
And then the award thing, it was not for the league, but years ago, I was working for a company that had won a Best Places to Work award. And we were so excited. And I pitched the local paper, and the reporter on the other end was like, I have 10 other press releases from individual companies on this. And I was immediately crushed because I was like, it's such a big deal to the company I was representing, but not so big of a deal to the paper that had 15 other individual Best Places to Work. So
absolutely,
I think it's like heartbreaking for us. And I think it would be helpful to everybody on this Zoom meeting, because we've probably all been in similar situations that it's not that it's not important, but we might have to reposition how we promote it because it's still awesome news to promote, but
Exactly.
we may not pick it up as earned media.
Sometimes I think it's appropriate to try, you try pitching it, you can put out the announcement. And if it doesn't get picked up, it's like, all right, we're moving that over to paid advertising. So it's not that you shouldn't necessarily try. It's just being, again, realistic about expectations. And, we're sharing anecdotes here from like 10, 15 years ago. I'm not joking when I say that the last year to 2 years, we have seen a dramatic difference in, engaging with journalists in general, especially in Maine. They have their own issues with staffing shortages, lots of different ownership changes. They're moving around to different media outlets. It's tough. It's a tough space for them. So just figuring that out, being mindful of that is really going to help, I think, with being successful and using your time and resources wisely.
Can I pause here, Marnie? Does anybody have any quick questions? Because I do. I think that was a great slide and just good compliment, and just kind of, it just reemphasized personal experiences I've had over my professional career. But does anyone have any questions before we move on? Just checking the chat. Okay. Nope.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's all good feedback, things to think about. So
yeah, thank you. Okay, at least I can see the chat today. The last time I gave a presentation, the chat wasn't showing up for me, so I think I ignored a lot of people. All right, so Emily's going to talk about pitching, because I will tell you, I didn't feel confident pitching the media until maybe, I've been in this space for about 20-ish years, until like maybe 10 years ago. So there was a pretty long span of my career where, so I guess what I'm trying to say is I appreciate that this is intimidating. This is not for everyone. A lot of times that's why people engage someone like us, because they just simply don't want to do it. But Emily's going to talk about the art of pitching, some of our tips and tricks. And I will say it just takes practice, and it takes building relationships with media so that it gets to the point where you're almost just having a conversation with a friend or a colleague versus cold calling. So go ahead, Emily.
I think that, just to start it off, that's a really important point, that, if we're all just saying, these people are getting so many emails from so many different organizations, the relationship development of it is really an important aspect. And if you're a person who does PR day in and day out, you have a little bit more time and energy to focus on that. It's a little bit more challenging if you've got a bunch of other things on your plate, but keep that in mind and understand that, it is, you don't want to just constantly be asking like, oh, I have this news. Can you share it? Can you share it? We really focus on what can we help provide journalists with to make their jobs a little bit easier. So we just talked about this, but sometimes you might think that you have big news or a story worth telling, but before you reach out to a media outlet, you really need to identify what elements are going to stand out for their specific audience. So a really important thing is, if it's a media outlet that you're not familiar with, look at their recent coverage or relevant coverage. That will help you see if they've covered something really similar recently, they might not want to do this again. You might be able to build off that story. And for that reason, it's important to see who at this outlet is writing about your topic, whatever that may be, so that you're reaching out to the appropriate person. If you pitch a journalist who is not at all covering what you want them to cover, they're not going to be happy. That's just one more email in their inbox. So really take some time to do your research. And then when it comes time to put this pitch together, help frame the story for them. So yeah, you might have big news, but why is that relevant? Did you win an award, but it was for something really cool or interesting that you're doing and nobody else is doing? One of the things we love to look at is, are there any stats, any recent studies or numbers? Journalists love numbers. So if you can say, you know, this really interesting study just came out and we have somebody who would be a great source. If you're writing something on this topic, we can speak to this. We have experience in this area. Again, as any other relevant news articles that may have come out, you don't want to be telling the same exact story, but perhaps you can build off of that. We also think about, can we provide them with any visuals, or really specify, here are the interviewees we have for you. Here are the people, kind of frame the story for them to make their job a little bit easier. And it also will make your pitch stronger, realistically. If you can kind of build out the ideal story in your head, you can help direct where that might go.
Awesome. I'm going to go through this one sort of quickly because we're sort of running out of time, and I do want to get to our case study just to show you an example of a campaign that we worked on last year. But you know, when we think about where does PR fit into the big picture, we spend a lot of time on repurposing your coverage. So it's great to get the coverage, but you don't want to just you know, stick it in a drawer and say, oh, hey, that was great. You want to really utilize it. So just some tips, and we're going to share the PDF of these slides so you can use this as a checklist in the future, but, you know, blog about it, obviously share it on your social channels. One of the things that is so hard sometimes, circulate it internally. Sometimes you have to actually email everybody internally and say, hey, people, look what just came out. Here's the link. Please share it on LinkedIn, even spoon feed them the copy to share. It can be frustrating to have to, you know, do that much hand holding, but sometimes that's what it takes. You know, include it in sales materials possibly, or in advertising. Or at minimum, just keep track with Google Analytics of, did you see a web traffic lift around the timing of the coverage, so that you could at least go back to your senior leadership team and report back on some results, basic results. Okay, so this is the case study that I was talking about, and hopefully the video will play. But basically, Pachaya Savings Bank is one of our clients, and last year, beginning of the year, they announced a strategic restructuring. And initially it was a conversation, and I hinted at this before, it was like, let's put out a press release about how we're going to do this. We're going to announce this restructuring. But we had the opportunity to take the time and really think through an entire integrated campaign. And this wasn't a huge campaign, but we knew that earned media would only take this message so far. So the big picture strategy was, we wanted to tell their story. They're a community bank with statewide reach, their story about this strategic restructuring, why are they doing it, and how it's part of their growth strategy. And we wanted them to gain visibility. And we wanted the professionals who had been promoted into these new roles, we wanted them to have name recognition for these new leaders. So that was the big picture strategy. I'm going to pause for a second and just make sure I'm seeing this chat. We share pieces internally quite often. Yeah. I'll come back to that in 1 second. So for this campaign, which we called Lining Up to Deliver, they were referring to it that way internally, and we ended up using it as an external campaign name. Our external communication strategy was to reach an audience of current and prospective banking customers, some of their banking and financial industry peers, some professionals and decision makers in key industries, and this was particularly important to their commercial lending team. So thinking back to our strategy slide, we went through that simple 4-step process, and then we knew we wanted to utilize owned media, paid and earned, because you know, we knew that earned media would only, you know, we could only rely on journalists to take this announcement so far. So the owned media piece of this really hinged upon their CEO, Larry Barker. And since you guys are in the financial services space, maybe you know Larry, but he really is one of those rare CEOs who's very, very approachable and real and endearing and accessible. And so we thought, let's and he's very good on camera too. So we thought, let's give Larry the opportunity to announce this restructuring himself. So we created a short Q&A video series where he made the initial announcement in one short video. And then I think we had 4 other videos where Larry interviewed each of the SVPs who had been hired or promoted into these roles through the restructuring to just talk about, what does this mean? Why is this important? And I think the other thing I want to share, and you'll see it in the video clip, is that we knew that some of the things they were saying were not things that a journalist would cover. Things like, this restructuring is, the benefits of it to their customers. It was very much brand speak. It was very important messaging, but it just wasn't, like Emily said, it didn't have those stats and facts to back it up. It wasn't enough for a full news article per se. It's things about like working across functional teams and growing into different markets. We did have an earned media component of that, but really getting into like conversations around that. We knew we needed to lean into owned media to be able to really get that out there. So that was an important part of our strategy. And then obviously we incorporated some social media advertising. So we pretty much put ad spend behind the videos and behind some digital display ads to get it in front of a broader audience. So this is the video.
So Dean, can you talk a little bit about why restructure and why should we do it now?
So restructuring now goes hand in hand with lining up to deliver. We're able to make decisions locally within our market because we know our market, and the cross-functional teams that we'll set up know the market as well. So what we may do in one market may be a totally different decision that we make in a different market. But that's the flexibility that we'll create with this new structure.
So as I'll let Emily talk about the advertising in a second, but just back to the video, really this campaign was centered around getting the people, the actual humans, their personalities, their faces out into the market. A lot of these people had been with the bank for a long time, but they had never really been in a public facing role. So now they're part of, a senior leadership team, their regional directors, getting their faces out there, their names out there in these markets. That was really the core of the strategy. And as you could see from that video, a lot of what they were saying, it was all very positive. It was just not necessarily something that a journalist would cover. So Emily, I'll let you talk about the display ads and then we'll take some questions.
Yeah, so this is just a way that we were able to really, like Marnie said, introduce the people here, show their faces, introduce them, and we really utilize these to complement the earned media strategy that we had, in addition to some of this other owned content that they developed. Like Marnie said, we knew that certain elements of this were not appropriate for earned media and for journalists, but we did send out a press release just announcing this restructuring, which is always important to do. I think the local media will pick up some of these, any new hires, promotions, that sort of thing. That's a good way to get your name out there on a regular basis if you are hiring regularly, just to show that you're actively doing that. And then the important thing was that we were able to continue, once we introduced these people, we were able to continue giving them some visibility by going back to that thought leadership element that we talked about a little bit, kind of focusing in on specific topics that they might be able to each speak to. So I think we have a few slides of just the visuals of, the actual transition and this big announcement that we made, followed by some other coverage in some of the more local media.
Yeah. So I want to make sure we have time for questions. We do have a slide here with just a few resources for further reading if you're interested. Some of these, I think all of these actually are on our blog, link out to our blog. The one on the story arc was in Maine Biz recently. I think Jen shared that link. Thank you, Jen, for that. So, and I think I have a slide here on just some nuts and bolts of building a media list. So I just want to make sure that I have some. Okay, thank you, Jen. Yeah, and I'm going to look at this. So go ahead and put any other questions in the feed in the chat, and I'll just look at what's here.
I think, Ian, that is a really important point, that you want to make sure that all of your employees are aware of these efforts, whether it's own content that's getting a little bit of extra visibility or the PR. We've run into that in the past where employees are like, oh, I didn't even know this was happening. So that's a really important step, to be sure that you're sharing it internally so that they know, but also they can further share that on their own channels.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to give a little shout out to the Maine Public Relations Council. Jen and I are both members. Emily is too, I think. That's actually how I met you, Jen, on the board of the PR Council. But if you are interested in PR, if it's something that you think you're going to be doing a little bit more of in your role for your credit union, the Maine PR Council, they have a pretty regular calendar of professional development events, very affordable ticket prices. They do have a media list that you can purchase. So that's just a resource that you might want to check out. And then there's also a regional chapter called PRSA. So there are some, trade association resources specific to PR. Sometimes if you just don't know how to actually put out a press release, we've had clients that feel really strongly about putting it out on the wire. I find that to be, it has its purpose. And I think that the biggest benefit to doing that is that you have an immediate shareable link. Now, it'll get picked up by some really random news syndicates, but sometimes, just having something to share is what checks that box. And most of our Maine focused clients, when you have local or statewide news, do not use a newswire service. It's usually when you have regional or national news and you really want to get it out really broadly, and you pay by the press release, or you can buy like a package. And then obviously utilizing a PR agency. Some organizations have a subscription to PR software. Cision is a popular one. We use Meltwater. So, if you're large enough and you're doing enough PR that you really need that media list access, you could look into Muckrock is another one. So yeah, just some resources that might be helpful as you pursue PR in the future. So any other questions?
Folks can either pop them in the chat or take yourselves off mute and ask away while we have these two great experts with us. Check the chat. Oh, one just came in. Marnie and Emily, do you see that one?
Yeah, so when focusing on owned media, are there certain things we should do to boost social media interaction? We share a lot on there and would love to grow our reach. So I'm assuming that you're referring to sharing maybe a video or some other type of brand material on maybe Facebook or Instagram, and you're looking for just getting more interaction in the channel. I think that just generally speaking, video tends to lead to more engagement over other types of content. So that's just something to think about. I will say that one of the things that we have seen work on the advertising side on social media in particular for video is that if you can see someone's face in the thumbnail, people are much more apt to click on it. So that just might be a little trick to try. And sometimes that's as simple as just adjusting the thumbnail image when you're exporting the video, so that you can, rather than just seeing some text on a screen and you're expecting people to click on it in their social feed, seeing a face, I think it gets back to that, human psychology. We tend to engage with other people. We're people, we like people. So that's something you could try. I think that there are ins and outs of all of the different social media platforms and their algorithms for trying to figure out how to get more engagement. I think conversation generally just keeps having commentary going back and forth, keeps it in the feed longer. So that's something to think about. Like if you share something, does your team have a methodology for keeping on top of comments so that you are engaging in that channel and keeping that conversation going? So that's going to help. And then sometimes it's just putting ad spend behind it to get it to a broader audience, or doing both. So those are just some things that come to mind.
I think making sure, that's another one that's a great reminder, that if you have employees who are active on social media, remind them, ask them to please like and interact with your content there as well, because those algorithms are always changing. But we all know that the posts and the content that gets the most interaction is shown to more people. So even if they can, give it a like or share it if they're willing to, that really helps as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it gets back to this really trying to get your internal team to utilize the platforms more, because on LinkedIn in particular, let's say you have an award that your credit union won, and your marketing team puts it out on the business page. You really want your stakeholders to comment on it and share it. And it's not just sharing it with nothing, it's commenting, like, getting those conversations going. It keeps it in the feed. And sometimes just teaching them that little trick helps. What do you recommend to professionals who are just starting to establish media contacts, making new relationships? What is the best way to build those relationships? I would say this kind of depends upon where you think you probably really want to be covered. So let's say you are just starting out and you really want your local paper to start to cover more of your community news. I would start with just doing some basic research about who the current editor and some of the writers are at that paper, and just sending an email with an introduction that says, "Hi, I'm Marnie, I'm at Fluent," or wherever. Just kind of a meet. They don't like to be asked to go out for coffee or lunch or the meet and greet. It's pretty much just sending an email. "Hey, just wanted you to have a heads up that I'm going to be sharing news with you." Just kind of a hello. That's probably the best way to start. Another thing that we do sometimes as an agency is when we have a new client, we reach out to all of our existing media contacts that cover that industry and say, we do it usually quarterly, just reminding them, here's who we have for spokespeople. So if your PR strategy is more on that executive visibility side, especially on the business side, you could reach out to a few and say, "Hey, heads up, I've got so-and-so and so-and-so. They have a lot of expertise in whatever it is, affordable housing or something like that." They would be available as a source if you're ever running a story on whatever in the Bangor market. I'm just making this up, but just, sometimes just popping a quick email, it's not necessarily a pitch, it's more of a hello, is a nice way to just start to get a relationship going.
And that's a great point for our credit unions, because your CEOs, your mortgage lenders, there's constantly stories about the housing market or interest rates, or, so position your thought leaders within your own institution as a way to help get your brand out there.
Yeah. And another topic for another day is media training for those people. Absolutely. That is so important. We've had many situations where we have them, they're on the list as a spokesperson, and we go out and pitch them and we bring them back an opportunity. And all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, I have to actually do this now. So preparing in advance and doing some role playing. And it's a wonderful exercise to go through so that everyone feels more confident when they do have that media interview opportunity.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
we're at 1:02. If anyone's got any last minute questions, I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. You can throw it in the chat. Not seeing any. This was great. I love working with both of you. And so I'm always learning. And so it's always helpful. And I took some takeaways from today. So I want to thank Marnie and Emily for sharing their time and talent. I want to thank all of our credit union marketers for the amazing work that you all are doing in your communities to support your credit unions. And if you've got any questions, this was recorded, so we will get this uploaded in case you want to go back and watch it. and I'll also share your slides. And thank you, Marnie, for sharing your information. So please feel free to reach out to the team at Fluent if you have
Yeah,
questions or
absolutely. Don't
follow-up.
be shy. Email us questions, follow us, and stay in touch. So thank you so much for having us. And
All right.
thank
Have
you.
a
next time
wonderful
it'll be saying
Thanksgiving,
Happy New
everybody.
Year.
All right.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much, everyone. Good to
Bye.
see you all. Take care.
Thanks.